Which is more important, the content or the way of expression, frame effect? For the same content, if some people change their expression, they will get totally different success results. This phenomenon is often considered to be the reporter's eloquence or the reporter's lack of analysis. This actually reflects an important psychological phenomenon, the frame effect. Frame effect refers to the fact that people's different descriptions of an objectively identical problem lead to different decisions. This concept was first proposed by Tversky and Kahneman in 1981. Kahneman hypothesized an experimental content. Imagine that the United States is preparing to deal with a rare disease, and it is expected that the attack of the disease will lead to 600 deaths. There are two options for fighting disease. According to scientific estimation, if Plan A is adopted, 200 people will survive and 400 people will die. If Plan B is adopted, there is a 1/3 probability that 600 people will survive, and there is a 2/3 probability that 600 people will die. The experiment found that most people would choose Scheme A because it gives a certain number of survivors, which is in line with the description of benefit framework. But if we describe the problem, if Plan C is adopted, 400 people will die and 200 people will survive. If Plan D is adopted, there is a 1/3 probability that 600 people will die, and there is a 2/3 probability that 600 people will survive. In fact, Plan A and Plan C are equivalent, and Plan B and Plan D are equivalent. They just change the priority of describing life or death. The results show that most people chose Scheme D in the second description, which is in line with the description of loss framework. If you don't understand the experimental results just now, let's take a simpler example. There was a niggard who accidentally fell into the river. A kind person was lying on the bank and shouted, "Give me your hand, I'll pull you up," but the niggard was not willing to extend his hand. The kind person began to be very puzzled, and then suddenly woke up, and shouted at the niggard who was about to sink, "I'll give you my hand, and you'll catch me." The niggard grabbed the hand of the kind person. You see, the facts described are the same, but if you change the way of expression, you will have different decision results. The enlightenment of the framework effect is that people's thinking habits and experiences will solidify some frameworks and affect people's decision-making. In interpersonal communication, the key is not what you say, but how you say it. For example, Richard Seiler, professor of behavioral science at the University of Chicago, put forward 4 principles of news release. 1. If you have several good news to release, you should release them separately, rather than together, so that the happiness will be doubled. 2. If you have several bad news to release, you should release them together, so that the pain will not expand. 3. If you have a big good news and a small bad news, you should tell these 2 news to others together, so that happiness will cover pain. 4. If you have a big bad news and a small good news, you should publish the 2 news separately, so that happiness is not submerged by pain. Of course, we also need to be aware of our thinking framework and bias, and strive to maintain an objective, rational and comprehensive thinking. In the next issue, we will talk about loss aversion, a relative of the framework effect.